US President Donald Trump has pitched the F-35 stealth fighter jet to India. Now, the US has offered India the F-15, F-16, the F-18 and even the F-21. But the fifth generation F-35 fighter jet was quite literally a bolt from the blue. Does India really need this fifth generation aircraft? How did it spring out of nowhere? Joining me on the News9 Plus show now to discuss this offer are Lieutenant General P. Ravi Shankar and Air Marshal Deeptendu Chaudhary. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Awesome.
Air Marshal Chaudhary, we were just talking about the F-35 just a few days back at the air show, and you told us how the F-35 was primarily a ground attack aircraft with only limited air-to-air capability. Does the Air Force really need an aircraft like the F-35 right now? What do you make of President Trump's offer?
Thank you for having me once again. Trump's offer is actually not really a surprise. The US is well aware of India's fighter necessity and this gap we have for a fairly long time. And like you yourself said, had offered US fighters earlier. Yes. The F-35 is a new new kid on the block from an offer point of view. But it has its own challenges. Most certainly, you'll be aware that the past platforms which they had offered us were essentially older platforms in their more modern avatars,
right,
but with limited future scope. The F-35 is a state-of-the-art fifth generation strike fighter essentially, with stealth characteristics and advanced air-to-ground capabilities. But it has certain limitations. I'm getting it from an Air Force perspective. It's a single-engine platform.
Right.
India will need platforms to penetrate deep into adversarial territories, which means packaging with larger formations of other platforms which support such missions.
Right.
And getting an F-35 means you have a standalone platform which will neither be able to network with other platforms, nor will it be able to network with our air defense systems as easily as it does with the other platforms with which the Indian Air Force currently employs. So essentially, it will be a standalone platform, and its survivability will be obviously an issue when it goes into depth areas. Given the numbers that we can probably purchase from the enormous cost of the F-35, we can probably at best pick up a couple of squadrons, but they will come with enormous limitations.
Give us, Air Marshal Chaudhary, sorry to interrupt you, but give us an idea of the numbers that we're talking of. If this were indeed to translate into a purchase, what are the numbers of F-35s you're looking at, and what is the cost of this aircraft? We're getting varied figures for it, from 100 million to up to even 300 million.
So these costs, very honestly, even I will not be able to pin down the cost, because these costs come with different aspects which are included. Certain things, certain offers include maintenance and overall aspects. Certain costs will include the weapons and the avionics and the other advanced supportive systems that you need with it. So the cost will vary. It depends on how much you want to buy. If you want to buy the full package, which the F-35 offers in its integrated form of car, where it is actually integrated very closely with the F-22 Raptor, and which is the air superiority fighter, and the F-35 given on the US carrier groups. But do remember, the F-35A comes at an enormous cost. It is a program which is, even as of the latest operational testing and evaluation report of the US government, it's a program beset with problems. A simple idea to give you is one line of code costs millions of dollars to change. So you can imagine the challenge you will end up in going for such an expensive US platform.
Right, absolutely. Challenges indeed over there. But, General Ravi Shankar, you've dealt with the US before. You handled the M777 howitzer buy from the US, another FMS deal. Very interesting, the statement from the Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri. He said, in response to the F-35 deal, he said that there's been no formal procurement process which has begun. How seriously do you take this statement in the terms of, is this bureaucraties for the fact that it's a long way off? Or is it the fact that the government of India was truly taken by surprise?
Look, the FMS is a proper procedure. If the first start point of that procedure is something called a letter of request. And that letter of request has to go from India or the Indian Air Force. But to reach to that, make that letter of request itself is a process because you have to go through an internal process. You have to evaluate that aircraft in some manner and come to the fact that, look, do you need it as per your operational situation? And
Right.
like as the Air Marshal was saying, you have to look at it in the larger perspective of our terrain, our operational,
Yes.
outlook and doctrines and all that, and then put a letter of request. I mean, just for this thing. Then after you give the letter of request, you get down to negotiations.
Right.
And it could involve trials also. It could involve maintenance trials also. It could
Right.
involve a lot of indigenization also. A whole lot of things. People are under the impression that FMS is a straight buy.
Right.
No, there's a whole lot of negotiation in it. Okay. And then there's the issue of how to maintain this aircraft beyond. So maintenance,
Yes. Yes.
space, everything which have to be based in India.
F-35 visuals.
And then you have to get to something called a letter of agreement, LOA. Once that is done, then the delivery starts. This process, by normal processes, any FMS case, average lifetime is 5 to 7 years. So we have to start, if you start the process today, the 5 to 7 years is from LOR. So I think you're looking at a time frame of about 8 to 10 years before the first aircraft lands if you've taken the decision to buy it.
10
Right. So
years
that's
is the process.
yeah. So it's not going to be in a hurry. This is a remark which has come out all out of the blue.
Right.
Uh, and I think this will start getting evaluated because
Right.
there are political repercussions of all this. There are
Yes.
also operational repercussions of all this.
Right.
And you have to also see the cost factor. Just because the USA is giving, will France give a competitive cost offer? Will Russia give a competitive, offer?
Right.
So, I mean, if you're going to spend 80 to 100 million dollars on an aircraft,
Right.
it has to be competitive. You just don't go buy it just because the president of, USA desires that India has to have a
It's an offer.
F-35.
So it's
Yeah,
an
it's
offer
an
that
offer.
it's an offer, and it's not an offer that we cannot refuse. It's not that kind of an offer. I mean, of course,
No,
India
no.
could
There's nowhere. No.
India could
Look,
take
let
that
me put it this
decision.
way:
Yes.
by the time the first LOR goes across everything, Trump would have gone out of the office.
Right.
So we start
Right.
dealing with the next administration.
That's
So
very
you have to
interesting. So the
understand.
procurement itself, the process itself, could take longer than the Trump tenure in the White House. So that's an interesting observation. But Air Marshal Chaudhary, looking at this MRFA, I mean, I get the vibes that I once got from the MMRCA, deal, that 10, 12-year-long process. And you look at the way the aircraft have been going up the ages, from the 15 to the 16 to the 18 to the 21 to now the 35. So the aircraft, increasing in numbers, project numbers, but the purchase still hasn't happened. But give us an idea of the Air Force's MRFA requirement, and is there a possibility that now you already have 3 aircraft in the fray, 3 US aircraft in the MRFA fray? Is it possible that F-35 could be a 4th aircraft now?
Yeah, I will like to sort of bring out one aspect. One is that the 114 requirement, or the MRFA requirement, is a critical one, which is I think a decade plus old requirement,
Right.
which the urgency has gotten to a point where we are really in serious doldrums.
Right.
And 5th generation aircraft is another aspirational requirement
Right.
of the future, given the kind of platforms which China is already fielded. So I don't think, we should be very careful in understanding the essential differences for the two. The 114 aircraft is not necessarily a 5th generation buy. It could be a
Right.
4.5 generation, which is needed in a quick hurry to bolster our declining numbers
Right.
over this next 10 years. But also they come with the caveat that these platforms will not be able to all come within the next 10 years.
Right. Right.
And within the next 10 years, it'll take more than 10 years, in fact, a decade and a half for India's 5th gen platform to come into being.
Right.
So associated with that comes the strategic partnership with the nations which already have 5th generation platforms.
Yes.
So essentially, like General Shankar very aptly brought out, that this is a serious political decision.
Right.
And this is what I have been firmly believing in, that there are two entirely different aspects. One is an operational requirement,
Right.
another is a political requirement.
Right.
And one aspect which I would like to bring out, and I have to put it on record right here itself, that any US buys
Yes.
comes governed by strict FMS policies,
Right.
which means they will have control of every bit of equipment. It's not really just like an howitzer. That means every
Yes.
radar, your radar warning receiver, your
Right.
EW frequencies, RT frequencies, networking frequencies, everything will be on US control. And we cannot change it and tune it.
Right.
That
Give
is
us an
one aspect.
idea, Air Marshal Chaudhary. What do you mean when you say everything is under the US control? Is it that you cannot tinker with these systems, or you have to use the US, or does the US have a back end into these systems? What do you mean when you say we don't have control?
US most certainly has a back-end entry to it. Secondly, the programming controls are such, they're manufactured in such a way that
Yes.
an outside buyer cannot reprogram these systems on their own without
Right.
specific clearance and support of the US.
Right.
We already face this in our platforms of the C1s, C117, C130s, and I'm sure the Navy also faces this in their P8Is.
So that's a very interesting point you made there, Marshal Chaudhary. The fact that we have a very large number of US equipment, especially aircraft. You have long range P8Is, and you have your helicopters, and of course C-17s and C-130s, and you still don't have full control over it. Could that be one of the reasons, General Shankar, that India has not bought fighter aircraft from the United States? We've only bought fighters from the Russian Federation and from France, and we've not touched the US in the last 2 decades. No fighter aircraft from the US.
Look, I don't think that's the straight equation that we didn't buy fighter aircraft because of these controls.
Right.
Because we bought other aircraft, we bought Apaches, we bought Chinooks, we bought C-17 series, P-8. So this is in continuation of that. So we know this problem. That's not a issue. And if we think that France won't have control over these backend systems, or Russia doesn't have control over these backend systems, then I don't think we are right. I'm sure they also come with the same issues, right? It might not be overt, but it is
Yes.
there. And I think with the experience which we have gained over procurement of aircraft and other equipment from all these three countries, we are talking of basically France, Russia, and USA. I think we have to start negotiating with all three as
Right.
to how to get out of these problems. And we
Right.
need to have this kind of a expertise built up. And we have to start waking up to this reality that we can't be dependent on them. I'll agree with him to say, look, that a howitzer is a simple thing and you're not dependent on them, all that. But let me assure you, the original howitzer which we got had these problems. We got out of it because we insisted that certain systems had to be changed. So
Right.
that thereafter, what they were giving us was the base, the barrel and the trails and things like that. And all the electronics were put to our order. So
Right.
something like that has to be worked out, I think. Whether America will be, okay with us doing it, whether the Air Force wants to put it through or not, or politicians will stand up to the whole story or not, is a bigger
Right.
question. Because the political overtones are very clear in this, right? And we have to be very clear, if you enter into this deal,
Right, right.
you're stuck with the USA, good, bad, or ugly, for a long time to
For
come.
three decades
As
at the
it
very
is-
least. Yes.
Yeah, as it is, you're quite invested into them.
Yes.
And if you're not going to get into if your AMCA doesn't come in time, and if
Yes.
there's issues, then there's no way out.
Right.
So you have to start hedging. I
Yes.
think hedging is something which we should start at this point of time. So far, it didn't matter. Let me put it why.
Right.
It didn't matter because we were not the power which we wanted to be. Our economy was not growing the way it is.
Right.
Hereafter, you're a regional power. You need
Yes.
to have. You want strategic autonomy.
Yes.
Strategic autonomy is just not other things. It's also operational autonomy.
Right.
And you can't be tied to US apron strings for your operational autonomy. And if
Right.
you want to be regional power from the Gulf of Aden to the Malacca Straits,
Yes.
and you want to be the regional security provider, net security provider, as they say, you need to have operational autonomy.
Absolutely.
And if the
Strategic
Air
and
Force
operational
doesn't,
autonomy. Yes, and if the Air Force doesn't
yeah,
have it, it will be a problem indeed. But, Marshal
yeah,
Chaudhary, you made that point about all of these requirements actually literally bunching up, because your fourth generation fighter aircraft, correct me if I'm wrong, is something that you would have wanted a decade ago, which is at least 2014 or 2015, which is why the MMRCA was begun. And the fifth generation should have started being delivered sometime around now in the late 2020s. Uh, where does that leave the indigenous aircraft projects like the LCA? You've committed to buying over 300 LCAs and over 100 AMCAs. Is there going to be enough money for all of these programs, for an MRFA, for an LCA, and possibly now even, this fifth generation fighter aircraft import?
For a long time, I have been talking about the fact that we now reached a stage. We all know the problems.
Yes.
There are nothing new. They have been, in fact, off late, and I think what is really heartening is off late the amount of debate and discussion which is going on this issue. It's now brought it out to a level which is always in the research backgrounds. I'll just elaborate a few points on the previous aspect before I step into this. Just bear in mind that at the end of the day, what happens is cost becomes more complicated than on a simple issue that when you buy a platform, you have to buy with it the associated turnaround, repair, maintenance, and overall facilities,
Right.
which have to be to US standards. And US standards are pretty, high end, and they're extremely expensive, as we have learned in the C-17 and C-130 infrastructure that we needed to build. So this is something we have to bear in mind, that anything we buy will come at an enormous associated cost, and this does not include the costs of weapons and advanced avionics and further upgrades of this platform.
Right.
So what I'm saying is it's a recurring cost. It is not a one-time cost, and this is something which we have to bear in mind. And anything which is recurring cost will all chew into our as it is limited budget requirements. Right. So this is something which we have to bear in mind. Second thing is, any platform which we buy, to remember our mainstay fleet is Russian.
Yes.
The US has huge reservations of their platforms operating in environments with Russian equipment.
Yes.
This is something which we need to bear, because we train in a cohesive, integrated environment where the ground environment, air defense environment, and essentially all have to network with each other. Right. Platforms have to talk to platforms. Platforms have to talk to surface radars. Platforms have to talk to control centers, nodes, and other airborne platforms as well. So this integration is not possible with a standalone platform, however modern it may be.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
So this is a huge challenge.
You're talking of the S-400 air defense systems that India has bought from Russia. That's incompatible with the F-35. That's what you're saying.
Not only that, all our mainstay Sukhoi fleet are Russian platforms, Russian radar systems, Russian weapon systems. So this is one side of one challenge. The other challenge which comes about is that when you bring in these two aspects together of the cost and the technology access, do remember that it will take a lot to build and develop our indigenous fighter capability, which is already hosted to the US engines.
Right, absolutely.
The question is, do you want to, they're already over a barrel, do you want to make this barrel bigger and higher? That is what I would like everyone to bear in mind.
Very interesting observations there. Yes, it's not just a a commercial sale. There are lots of strings attached, and as you said, both of you gentlemen, the fact that strategic autonomy and operational autonomy is something very critical that the Indian Armed Forces would like to have. Thank you very much for joining us, Air Marshal Chaudhary. General Ravi Shankar continues to stay with us.